When he doesn't call or message you for a long time, it's easy to fall into a spiral of thoughts. You check your phone more often, you start rereading old conversations, you wonder what went wrong, what you could have said differently, or whether you pushed too hard or pulled away too soon. But here's a truth most people don't want to face. Silence is a message. And sometimes it's the loudest one you'll ever receive. You see, human beings are creatures of habit and intention. When someone wants to talk to you, they do. When a person values your presence, they make an effort to reach out even when they're busy. Think about it. You've been busy before, but you still made time for the people you truly care about. So if days pass and messages stop coming, if phone calls are replaced with empty notifications, that silence becomes a form of communication. It's not always about being harsh or cold. Sometimes it's avoidance. Sometimes it's emotional immaturity. But always silence is saying something. And you have to be wise enough not to cover it with excuses. Many people will try to rationalize this distance. Maybe he's going through something. Maybe he just needs space. Maybe he lost his phone. But how many maybes will you use to cushion a reality that is quietly making itself known? The truth is, people show you who they are by how they treat you in your absence, not just in your presence. When someone goes silent, they are choosing not to engage. They are choosing not to feed the connection. And when someone doesn't feed a connection, it weakens. And when it weakens, you feel the weight, not because you did anything wrong, but because you were emotionally invested in something that is no longer being nurtured. That silence starts to echo in your mind. You begin to analyze every little detail, hoping to find a reason. But what you're really doing is trying to protect yourself from the pain of not feeling chosen. Because being ignored or left unread doesn't just hurt, it makes you question your worth. And that's where you must wake up. That's where you need to pause and ask yourself a difficult but necessary question. Why are you giving so much mental and emotional power to someone who isn't even thinking about you in this moment? Now understand something deeper. Silence from another person often turns into noise within you. It fills your mind with doubt, your heart with anxiety, your spirit with confusion. But that noise doesn't come from them. It comes from your expectations, your hopes, your fears. You're the one replaying the last message. You're the one wondering why the dynamic shifted. But remember, you're also the one with the power to decide what you'll believe about yourself in that silence. This isn't about blaming the other person. It's about understanding the energy exchange. When someone's silence becomes consistent, that's not just a lapse. It's a pattern. Patterns are messages in disguise. Consistent silence is someone telling you they are not prioritizing you without the confrontation. That may be their way of emotionally withdrawing, avoiding accountability, or simply letting the connection die quietly. But you must stop trying to resuscitate what someone else is trying to bury. And let's take it a step further. When you continue to reach out, to wait, to hope, what you're really doing is sending a message back, one, that says you'll accept breadcrumbs. You're training your subconscious to be okay with uncertainty, with neglect, with unavailability. And that shapes how you see yourself. That conditions your self-worth to fluctuate based on how someone else chooses to treat you on any given day. But you are not a backup plan. You are not a filler. You are not an afterthought. And if someone treats you as such, their silence is offering you the opportunity to see that clearly. Silence doesn't always come with closure. In fact, the most painful endings are the ones that happen with no explanation, no goodbye, no justification, just fading. And that fading is meant to teach you to stop chasing closure from other people and start creating clarity within yourself. It's meant to teach you how to listen, not to their words, because there are none, but to their actions, or in this case, their lack of action. Silence teaches you boundaries. It teaches you that your energy is sacred, that your emotions are not toys for someone to pick up when they're bored and drop when they're done. When someone doesn't reach out and you allow it repeatedly, you send a silent message back that you are available for uncertainty, that your time isn't valuable, that your heart can be placed on hold. And every time you excuse the silence, you reinforce the behavior. So you have a choice. You can sit there watching the screen, waiting for a message that may never come, or you can interpret the silence for what it is: disinterest, distraction, or detachment. You can see it as a mirror, not a mystery. The message is simple. If they wanted to reach out, they would have. People make time for what they truly value. And your responsibility is not to beg for space in someone's life, but to recognize where your energy is not being reciprocated. When someone doesn't reach out, when the calls stop coming and the messages dry up, it's common to look inward and assume the worst about yourself. It's an almost automatic response. You start replaying the last conversation, dissecting every word, wondering if you said too much or not enough. You question your tone, your timing, your presence. You go into overthinking mode, searching for where you might have gone wrong. But the danger of this internal dialogue is that it often leads you to one painful conclusion: you were the problem. And that belief can be more damaging than the silence itself. This is where most people fall into a mental and emotional trap. They assume that someone else's distance, inconsistency, or lack of communication must be a reflection of their own shortcomings. Maybe you weren't exciting enough, attractive enough, funny enough, interesting enough. Maybe you cared too much. Maybe you didn't play hard to get. The mind starts creating a story where the absence of attention equals the absence of worth. But that's a lie, a subtle, convincing lie that sneaks into your confidence and begins to erode it from the inside out. What we must understand is that people's actions are based on their reality, not ours. Their patterns, behaviors, and choices are rooted in their upbringing, their emotional maturity, their priorities, their fears, and their comfort levels, not in your value. A man who doesn't call you isn't necessarily rejecting you. He might be overwhelmed with his own life, emotionally unavailable, or simply not in alignment with the depth of connection you desire. His silence doesn't mean you are unworthy. It means he is either unwilling or unable to meet you where you are. And that's about him, not you. Yet when you're emotionally invested, detachment feels personal. You take it to heart because you opened yourself up, and that vulnerability is sacred. It's not easy to admit you cared, that you wanted a bond, that you hoped for something meaningful. So when it isn't returned, it feels like a rejection of your truth. But emotional investment doesn't guarantee emotional reciprocity. And when it's not mutual, it doesn't make your feelings invalid. It just means the other person is not in the same place or not capable of reciprocating in a way that honors your presence. You see, the mind is always looking to make sense of emotional discomfort. And without clarity from the other person, it starts creating assumptions. That's when you start blaming yourself. Because blame, even when misplaced, provides a sense of control. If it's your fault, then maybe there's something you can change. Maybe you can change, adjust, adapt, become more likable, more appealing, more perfect. But chasing perfection to earn someone's attention is like trying to hold water in your hands. It will always slip away, and you'll always feel empty. The real challenge is learning to separate your self-worth from someone else's behavior. You are not defined by how someone treats you, responds to you, or even sees you. You are defined by how you see yourself. And if you allow another person's silence to become your inner voice, you surrender your power to their absence. That's the beginning of emotional self-abandonment. You start to show up less for yourself. You stop smiling as often. You feel less confident walking into a room. You question your decisions. And all of this begins with a false belief that someone not choosing you means you are unworthy. But worth isn't earned through being chosen. Worth is your birthright. It is not negotiable. It doesn't increase when someone texts you, and it doesn't decrease when they don't. You are not an option, a maybe, a convenience. You are whole, complete, and powerful, whether or not someone else can recognize that. And if someone can't see your value, it's not your job to convince them. It's your job to remember it yourself. The problem arises when we measure our identity by how others respond to us. If he doesn't message you, then you must be boring. If he doesn't call, then maybe you are too available. If he disappears, then perhaps you said something wrong. But this lens is broken because people project their own chaos, wounds, and fears onto others all the time. A man might ghost you not because of anything you did, but because he doesn't know how to process his own emotions. He may pull away not because you're too much, but because he feels inadequate. Or maybe he simply isn't invested the way you are, and that's okay. But again, none of these possibilities require you to shrink yourself. What you must learn is to become your own source of validation. When someone doesn't reach out, it's not a signal for you to panic, chase, or devalue yourself. It's a moment for you to pause and center yourself. Ask, what am I making this silence mean about me? If the answer points to inadequacy, then you know you've handed your power over to someone else's behavior, and it's time to take it back. This is not about ego, it's about emotional responsibility. You are responsible for what you choose to believe about yourself. You are responsible for how you interpret someone else's absence. And if you constantly internalize rejection, you will train your nervous system to expect abandonment, to brace for silence, to assume you're not good enough. That becomes a self-fulfilling cycle, and it keeps you trapped in relationships where you tolerate the bare minimum just to feel something. But you deserve more than that. You deserve consistency, clarity, presence, and peace. You deserve to be someone's priority, not their option. And when someone doesn't communicate with you, let that be the clarity you need, not the confusion you carry. One of the hardest pills to swallow in life is this: people do what they want to do. If he wanted to call, he would. If he wanted to text, he would. If he truly valued your presence, your conversation, your support, he would find a way to let you know. You wouldn't have to wonder, chase, question, or shrink yourself to stay relevant in his world. The silence wouldn't be so loud. The uncertainty wouldn't weigh so heavily on your mind. And yet here you are, trying to make sense of the inconsistency, trying to justify the lack of communication by giving him the benefit of every doubt. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's overwhelmed. Maybe he doesn't know how to express himself. You begin to bend logic just to protect your heart. But the truth remains, people make time for what they value. And when someone doesn't show up, they're telling you something, even if they never say a word. We live in a time where communication is easier than ever. It takes mere seconds to send a message. You can type out a thought in the middle of the night, on a break, in traffic, during lunch. There's no valid excuse anymore for why someone consistently chooses not to reach out, except that they don't want to. And that reality is not meant to hurt you, it's meant to free you. It's meant to deliver you from the cycle of over-explaining, overthinking, and overextending. It's meant to wake you up to this one powerful truth. Actions reflect priorities. So many people cling to words. They hold on to a memory of when he said he missed them, or how he once talked about the future, or how he seemed so different in the beginning. And while those words may have been sweet, comforting, and maybe even genuine at the time, they become meaningless when not followed by effort. Words are just vibrations in the air if they aren't backed by consistency. Someone can say all the right things and still never show up for you. Someone can make promises and never follow through. Someone can feed you attention only when it's convenient, just enough to keep you hanging on, but never enough to give you stability. And when you start living off breadcrumbs, your heart begins to starve. You start convincing yourself that small gestures mean big intentions. You start thinking that a single text after days of silence is proof that he cares. But it's not about if someone reaches out once. It's about whether they show up with reliability. You don't need someone who messages when it's easy. You need someone who reaches out because you matter, because they think of you, because they respect the space you hold in their life. And when that is missing, the absence is not an invitation for you to try harder. It's a message that you must listen to with your mind, not your emotions. Sometimes the heart is so invested that it becomes blind to reality. It creates a fantasy to protect you from the pain of letting go. It paints a story around the silence, hoping to make it softer. But silence is often the clearest answer. When someone doesn't communicate, doesn't engage, doesn't check in, it's not because they forgot you exist. It's because they're making a choice. And you too must start making choices, not based on how you feel, but based on what you observe. You deserve to be with someone who chooses you daily, not someone who appears and disappears based on their mood or convenience. Love is not built on guessing games. You shouldn't have to wonder if you're important. You shouldn't have to read between the lines, analyze timestamps, or interpret vague messages to feel validated. That kind of emotional instability breeds anxiety, insecurity, and doubt. It chips away at your self-esteem. It keeps you in a reactive state, waiting for someone else to decide your value. But you were not created to be an option. You were not designed to beg for someone's time. You were not born to feel invisible in a space where your presence should be appreciated. The real issue arises when you begin to internalize someone's lack of effort as your lack of worth. That's when the real damage is done. That's when the silence becomes not just something you hear, but something you feel deep in your identity. And that's the lie you must fight against. You fight it by recognizing patterns. You fight it by asking, has this person shown up consistently? Have they demonstrated genuine interest or just temporary attraction? Do they value communication or do they disappear when things get serious? These are not harsh questions. They are necessary ones, because your peace matters, your clarity matters, your time, your energy, your emotional health, they all matter. And when someone keeps showing you through their lack of action that you're not a priority, you must believe them. It's easy to make excuses for others when you're emotionally attached. But making excuses only delays the healing. It keeps you tethered to a situation that doesn't feed your soul. It tricks you into thinking that if you're just more patient, more understanding, more available, things will change. But relationships don't work that way. They don't evolve through waiting and hoping alone. They grow through mutual investment. And without that mutual energy, you're simply in a relationship with someone who is not in it with you. Silence has a message. Inconsistency has a message. Lack of effort has a message. And the moment you stop trying to rewrite that message to protect your feelings, you begin to reclaim your power. You begin to see things clearly. You begin to understand that attention is not love, that messages sent out of guilt or boredom are not proof of care, and that someone wanting you when it's convenient is not the same as someone choosing you every day. When you find yourself constantly checking your phone, waiting for a call or message that never comes, your mind begins to spiral into a storm of emotions. It's not just about the silence. It's about what that silence makes you feel. You begin to question your worth, your significance, and even your identity. That silence becomes a mirror reflecting every insecurity you've tried to bury. And the longer it stretches, the more you internalize the idea that you're not enough. This is where the danger lies. Not in the other person's behavior, but in what you allow it to awaken inside you. You may think it's about him, but it's actually about you. It's about how much power you've given to someone else's actions or lack thereof to dictate how you feel about yourself. You let his absence become the measuring stick for your value. And that right there is a lie. You were whole before he ever entered your life. You were complete, worthy, and enough long before the first message, the first date, the first conversation. But somewhere along the way, you forgot. You started placing pieces of your worth in someone else's hands, hoping they would hold it carefully, hoping they would see your value and affirm it. And when they didn't, when they went quiet, when they withdrew, it triggered something deeper. That's the real wound. This isn't just about romance, it's about how you relate to your own reflection. Because the root of this pain is not just in missing someone, it's in believing that their silence is proof that you're not lovable, not valuable, not seen. But their silence is not a reflection of you, it is a reflection of them, their capacity, their priorities, their maturity, their intentions. Yet, instead of seeing it clearly, you begin to turn inward and question yourself. Did I do something wrong? Was I too much? Not enough? Too open? Too quiet? Too eager? The mind becomes a courtroom, and you place yourself on trial, trying to find evidence to justify the silence. And every second you spend in that courtroom, you lose energy, peace, and clarity. Emotional dependency doesn't start with someone else. It starts with a subtle compromise within. It starts when you ignore your own needs just to accommodate someone else's inconsistency. It starts when you silence your own voice just to keep the connection alive. You abandon your standards because you're afraid that enforcing them will make you lose what little you have. And in doing so, you slowly betray yourself. You start to settle for less, not because that's all you deserve, but because you're afraid you won't find better. That fear keeps you emotionally tethered to someone who isn't even present. You stay emotionally involved in a one-sided connection because it feels safer than facing the void. But what you don't realize is that the longer you stay in that space, the more you're training your heart to accept confusion as love and inconsistency as intimacy. And this is why detachment becomes essential, not as an act of cruelty, but as an act of self-respect. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop over-investing in people who aren't showing up for you. It means you stop bleeding for someone who wouldn't offer you a bandage. It means you start choosing yourself even when it hurts, because your emotional freedom is your responsibility. And the more you reclaim it, the more you heal. You see, when you are emotionally dependent on someone else's behavior to feel okay, you are at their mercy. When they're loving, you feel alive. When they're distant, you feel abandoned. When they're silent, you feel invisible. That is no way to live. Your emotional well-being cannot ride the roller coaster of someone else's whims. You need a foundation within yourself that is so solid, so grounded, that no matter who comes or goes, you remain whole. You remain centered. You remain rooted in truth. This is not about becoming numb or cold. It's about becoming conscious. Conscious of your patterns, conscious of your value, conscious of how you've allowed your emotions to be manipulated by uncertainty. You must become the guardian of your emotional space. You must filter who has access to your mind, your heart, your peace. Because not everyone deserves to carry the privilege of influencing your inner world. Not everyone has the maturity to honor the depth of what you bring to the table. And until you understand that, until you fully own that, you will keep handing your peace over to people who don't even know what to do with it. Healing begins when you stop trying to decode someone else's silence and start paying attention to your own inner voice. The voice that says, I deserve to be chosen. I deserve to be respected. I deserve to be prioritized. Not begged for, not tolerated, not temporarily entertained. You begin to heal when you stop waiting for someone to realize your value and start acting like it's already evident. Because it is. When you stop trying to control the narrative, stop trying to fix, to chase, to explain, you create space for peace. Real peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on whether someone texts you back, but the kind that is built on deep self-knowing. You begin to realize that emotional clarity is not found in someone else's actions, but in your own decision to stop giving energy to confusion. Confusion is a thief. It steals your time, your focus, your emotional strength, but it only thrives where there is permission. You give confusion power every time you ignore the truth your heart already knows. You give it power every time you hope someone will change when they've shown no intention to. You give it power when you allow potential to override reality. But when you decide to face the facts, not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of strength, you start cutting the emotional cords that have kept you entangled in uncertainty. You begin the sacred work of separating your worth from someone else's choices. And that right there is where freedom begins. It's easy to fall into the illusion that your emotions are entirely tied to what someone else is doing or not doing. But that illusion is dangerous because it strips you of your own power. When you believe that someone else's silence or absence is the reason you're suffering, you're surrendering control of your emotional life. The truth is, the emotional pain you feel isn't created by the other person. It's created by the story you're telling yourself about their behavior. You interpret their silence as rejection. You interpret their lack of effort as proof that you aren't good enough. But none of that is objective reality. That's the narrative you've constructed. And if you can construct it, you can also deconstruct it. Most people never question the stories their mind tells them. They experience emotional pain and immediately assign blame to the other person. But rarely do they turn the mirror inward and ask themselves, why am I attaching so much meaning to this? Why does this affect me so deeply? That's the real work. That's where transformation happens. You see, pain doesn't come from the silence itself. It comes from the meaning you assign to the silence. And when you realize that, you also realize that you have the power to shift the meaning. You have the power to tell a new story, one that serves you. Think about it. You could interpret a lack of communication as abandonment, or you could see it as clarity. You could view their distance as a personal rejection, or you could see it as protection from someone not aligned with your growth. The situation doesn't change, but your interpretation does. And that changes everything. When you change the way you think about what's happening, you change the way you feel about it. And when you change the way you feel, You stop reacting from a place of weakness. You begin responding from a place of wisdom. This is where the real shift takes place. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to behave differently in order for you to feel better, you start reclaiming emotional authority. You start operating from a higher level of consciousness. You're no longer controlled by the push and pull of someone's attention. You're no longer addicted to external validation. Instead, you become anchored in your own awareness. You begin to see that peace is not something you earn from others. It's something you create within. And here's the part most people avoid: taking responsibility for their emotional triggers. Because it's much easier to blame someone else for your pain than to sit down and do the deep internal work of understanding where that pain really comes from. Maybe their silence triggered an old wound of abandonment from your past. Maybe their inconsistency touched on your fear of not being lovable. Whatever it is, it's not new. It's familiar. And if you don't address the root, you will repeat the pattern. Different person, same emotional cycle. And it won't end until you interrupt it consciously. That's why emotional self-awareness is so important. It's not just about feeling your feelings, it's about understanding them. You have to ask yourself, what am I really feeling right now? What am I afraid this situation means about me? Where have I felt this before? These questions lead you to the truth, and the truth sets you free. Because the moment you understand your emotional response is a reflection of your inner landscape, not someone else's behavior, you regain power over your inner world. This doesn't mean you excuse toxic behavior. It means you stop making it personal. It means you recognize someone else's lack of effort, consistency, or presence is not a commentary on your worth. It's a commentary on their capacity. It's not your job to fix, chase, or interpret silence. Your job is to maintain your peace, protect your energy, and elevate your emotional standards. Too often, we try to control other people's actions so that we don't have to deal with our own feelings. But the truth is, the only thing you can control is how you respond. You don't control whether someone calls or texts you, but you do control how much space they occupy in your mind. You control whether you sit in anxiety, refreshing your screen, or redirect your focus towards something that feeds your growth. You control whether you spiral into self-doubt or return to self-worth. And that's where the magic happens. When you stop focusing on what you can't control and start mastering what you can. Emotional mastery is not about suppressing your feelings. It's about learning from them. Every emotion is a messenger. It's there to teach you something about yourself, about your needs, your wounds, your patterns. But you can't learn the lesson if you're fixated on someone else. You have to bring the focus back to you, because no one else is responsible for your peace. No one else can validate your worth in a way that lasts. That's your job. And when you take that responsibility seriously, you become unshakable. There's a strength that comes from being able to witness your own pain without running from it. From being able to hold space for your own disappointment without letting it define you. That's what emotional power looks like. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's calm, quiet, and deeply grounded. It's a kind of power that doesn't need to beg for attention or force connection. It's a kind of power that knows, if you don't see my value, that's not my loss. It's yours. And that power doesn't come from changing others. It comes from changing how you see yourself. It comes from choosing to respond to emotional challenges with awareness instead of reactivity. From rising above the drama and anchoring yourself in truth. Because once you realize your emotions are not at the mercy of anyone else, you stop giving them that kind of control. You stop handing your peace over to people who haven't earned it. You start living from a place of alignment, where your feelings no longer depend on anyone's presence, approval, or response. When he doesn't call or message you for a long time, it's natural to feel a sense of confusion, disappointment, or even heartbreak. But in that silence lies an opportunity. It's an opportunity to redirect the attention you've been pouring outward back into yourself. This isn't about punishing him, nor is it about pretending not to care. It's about understanding that healing doesn't happen when you're fixated on someone else's absence. It happens when you begin to fill in your own gaps. Too often, people believe that the only way to feel whole again is to get closure from the one who caused the hurt. But true healing doesn't wait on someone else's apology, consistency, or return. True healing begins the moment you decide to stop abandoning yourself. When someone's presence becomes inconsistent or when communication fades, it usually triggers a wound deep inside. And that wound says, you're not enough. You're easy to walk away from, or you're forgettable. But these are not truths. These are emotional echoes from the past. Unprocessed pain dressed up in a new disguise. If you don't consciously work through those echoes, you'll end up chasing people who mirror your unresolved beliefs. That's why healing isn't about them. It's about peeling back the layers and understanding why their absence hits you so hard in the first place. The more you turn inward, the more you start to realize that the pain isn't just about the silence, it's about what you made the silence mean about you. This is the beginning of self-healing, the willingness to confront your internal landscape without judgment. When someone doesn't reach out, the mind will often jump to worst-case scenarios. They don't care. They've moved on. I was never important. But what if none of those were true? What if the real issue isn't what they did or didn't do, but how easily you abandoned your own peace to interpret their action? This is why emotional healing isn't something passive. It's a process of taking active responsibility for how you choose to experience life, even when it hurts. Start by observing your emotional patterns. Do you often seek validation through someone's presence? Do you feel anxious when you're not receiving attention? Do you tie your worth to how consistently someone shows up for you? If the answer is yes, it doesn't make you weak or broken, it makes you aware. And awareness is the first step in transformation, because once you can see your patterns, you can change them. You can begin to soothe yourself instead of seeking someone else to do it for you. You can learn how to sit with the discomfort of silence without making it a story about your inadequacy. It's also vital to recognize that emotional healing doesn't mean you'll never feel pain again. It means that pain will no longer control your identity. It means when someone doesn't call or message you, you won't spiral into a narrative that you're unlovable. You'll simply see it for what it is, a moment, not a definition. Healing allows you to detach from the need to be chosen and anchor yourself in the truth that you already are enough, even when no one else is reminding you of it. One of the most powerful ways to accelerate emotional healing is through radical self-honesty. That means acknowledging where you've been betraying yourself to hold on to someone else. Maybe you kept waiting for a message that never came. Maybe you made excuses for their silence. Maybe you ignored your own needs because you were hoping they'd finally see your worth. These aren't just behaviors. They are indicators of wounds asking to be addressed. And you address them not by blaming yourself, but by forgiving yourself for not knowing better, for overextending, for choosing others before choosing you. Then you begin to shift. You stop reaching out in desperation and start reaching inward for clarity. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you from your own loneliness and begin building a life that feels full, rich, and authentic. You reclaim the energy you were giving away and reinvest it into your growth. You do the things that make you feel alive again. You create. You connect with yourself, with purpose, with people who reflect your worth, not challenge it. You move your body. You breathe deeply. You remind yourself daily that healing isn't a destination. It's a commitment you make every single moment. You choose yourself over your pain. As you heal, your standards evolve. You no longer accept crumbs of attention because you're no longer starving for validation. You no longer tolerate emotional inconsistency because you've learned how to be emotionally consistent with yourself. You develop a sense of internal safety that doesn't rely on someone else showing up. And because of that, you become more magnetic. Not to people who want to use you, but to those who respect your wholeness. People feel when someone is healed because there's a peace about them that doesn't demand, doesn't chase, doesn't cling. That peace comes from self-trust. And self-trust is born through the healing process. The silence that once felt unbearable becomes a sacred space for self-reconnection. The distance that once caused fear becomes a gift that created room for growth. And the absence that once triggered wounds becomes the mirror that showed you where you needed to love yourself more deeply. This is the power of healing. It transforms what was meant to break you into something that builds you. It's not easy. It takes time, patience, and courage. But every step you take away from the noise and back toward your center is a step toward freedom. Healing teaches you that you are not what has happened to you. You are who you choose to become in response to it. And that above all else is what gives you your power back.